Thank you. All right, back to the introductions. Ms. Daphne Kwok is currently the Vice President of Multicultural Leadership for Asian American Pacific Audiences at AARP. Most of you are familiar with what that stands for. It's basically a national organization of the American Association of Retired Persons. Their interest in helping NAP identify what are the tough and important topics has been a longstanding partnership and will be doing more in the coming year. Ms. Kwok also has been Executive Director of Asian Pacific Islanders with Disabilities in California, Angel Island Immigration Station Foundation, the Asian Pacific American Institute for Congressional Studies, and for 11 years, the Organization of Chinese Americans, OCA. Without further ado, I'd like to turn this over to Ms. Kwok about why this is so important for AARP to connect with all of us. And then we will then have our two panelists, Ms. D.J. Ida from Denver and Mr. Glenn Masuda from California, speaking on caregiving. Daphne?
Thank you so much, Cindy, and welcome. And what a great pleasure it is for AARP to be joining NAP really for the very first time. And it's a partnership that we have been looking forward to for a very long time. You may be wondering what AARP, which right now is just AARP. It's like IBM, you know, we just go with AARP. Why are we interested in NAP? And because I know that many of you are younger. Most of you are probably younger than the age of 50, while AARP is for people 50 years and older, but it's really for anybody and everybody. And I think especially for the AAPI community, we all know that family is very important, and the intergenerational work that we do as families, especially to inform and educate and really to take care of ourselves, is really based around family. And so for us, it is much more than just people 50 and over. It is really, for us, much more important actually to reach out to the younger generations. Because as we also know that the issues that AARP addresses, whether it's like financial stability, whether it's taking care of your health and wellness, all of these, we really need to start at a younger age. And if you're 50 years old or older, you know, in a way, it's almost a little too late. So we want everyone to get onto a good path early, and especially in the area of caregiving as well, where 1/4 of millennials, 1/4 are caregivers, and that number probably will surprise everybody. But it's a data point that I like to use, why all these issues that AARP addresses is so relevant to each and every one of us. And I have to tell you that AARP, our information is really for anybody, whether you're a member or not. And so there are a lot of tremendous resources on the aarp.org website. We also have an AAPI specific work, and you can find out more about us through AARP, AAPI. Our Facebook page is probably the best way as well. But I want to really turn it over. Whether it's caregiving, whether it's right now on the area of mental health, especially as we're all going, the nation is going through this COVID crisis, AARP wants to be the resource to be able to provide information to help people get through these very, very difficult and challenging times. We've labeled this challenging conversation because actually for AARP issues that we address, those are all sort of like taboo issues in the Asian community. No one wants to talk about health publicly. No one wants to talk about end-of-life issues in our community. And so I want to help AAPIs push the envelope, raise these issues to become everyday conversations for our community so that we really can take better care of ourselves and our loved ones. And so I'm going to turn this over to my very, very, very dear friend, DJ Ida of the National AAPI Mental Health Association. And we're very fortunate to have Glenn Masuda as well joining us as well for their expertise in the area, especially around mental health, where we very much want to be able to start conversations and be a catalyst for conversation in our community. So thank you, Cindy. Thank you, NAP. And we look forward to our continued conversations and dialogue with NAP members. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daphne. Glenn and I would first like to thank both NAP and AARP and Cindy for setting this up. And I would just like to return, I've known Daphne for many, many years, and she, as Cindy said, has been a very strong advocate for issues for many, many years. And we really appreciate the support she has around mental health, because COVID-19 really has changed forever this country in so many different ways. And as difficult and as challenging as COVID-19 has been, one of the quote unquote silver linings, it's really shown a light on mental health and the fact that mental health is something that can impact anybody at any given time. It's not something that happens to others, it happens to us. We then look about what it's like to be a caregiver. That's also something that the stresses there are also, just sort of compounds it. Before I go into sort of the brief intro, just very, very briefly, she said, my name is D.J. Eid. I'm Executive Director of NAPIMA. And like Glenn, and he will introduce himself, I've been involved in working with mental health issues within the Asian American community literally for decades. And this is something where it wasn't something we talked about, but working with the community really taught us there's so many things that they're the strengths in the community as well as some of the challenges. And we're going to go over some of those today, but I want to sort of save time for the discussion. I'm going to turn it over to Glenn. He will do a quick intro of himself, and then I will give you an introduction and we're going to get right into the discussion. Glenn?
Thank you, Jay. Good morning, everybody. I'm Glenn Masuda. I'm the Associate Divisional Director of the Asian Pacific Family Center. It's a nonprofit private community mental health agency in Rosemead, California. For those who are not familiar, south of Pasadena. Have been there since 1986, so I believe I'm going to be in that category, if not already, of, I believe we're saying it's emerging agers. And very happy to be here, and I thank you for the opportunity. And like DJ, we've worked a very long time in the field, and one of our biggest tasks has always been to normalize who we are, what we are, and how we were raised as being strengths and not weaknesses. So I think that'll do.
That will do. So anyway, what we're going to do is, we've told you very briefly about us. When we're talking to Cindy, I've actually been aware of NAP for quite a few years, but this is the first time we've done a formal presentation to all of you. So this is what you sort of learned about it. They were established in 1982 after the death of Vincent Chin. And so even though that was a catalyst for really, I think, organizing the AAPI communities, NAP really is not organized to be a social justice organization per se, but there's a real intersectionality. And the things that as leaders you were looking at is that all elements really do affect who our communities are. That 97% of you have at least a bachelor's degree and 35% have a master's above. So this is a highly educated community, and that there are a lot of leaders among you. And as Daphne said, we're all emerging leaders. So when Glenn and I were putting this together and consulting with Daphne, the whole idea of caregiving. And so what we wanted to do is to look at what that is like. Not all of you may be caregivers, or what we call the sandwich generation, taking care of your elder parents and then maybe younger family. But the things we're talking about directly relate to what it is for you to be as a leader. So whether you're specifically in the caregiving category or not, the dynamics that we will discuss really have a cultural background. Those are really important that we wanted to look at. So what we'll be talking about is, and this is again is something that as psychologists, Glenn and I, we spent our professional careers looking at, and we both work specifically in the AAP communities. It's how we communicate, it's what we feel, how we reflect, and these often really reflect our cultural values. And this in turn, the more we understand about this, the better leaders we become. So because this affects the decisions that we make and responds to everything that we hear and see. So oftentimes we may be unaware of this, just like I'm a third generation Japanese American. I didn't realize how Japanese I was until I went off to college because I speak only English. So these cultural values really, really stay with us throughout, whether we're aware of it or not. So hopefully through this conversation, we're going to bring sort of an awareness about what those are as we have those difficult decisions and some of the things that you can do to sort of improve that. So basically what we want to do is we're going to look at 3 areas, and it's just basically what are those difficult conversations, what are some of the cultural values, and then basically what we're going to do after that. So Glenn, if you could start off with sort of the discussion around some of the difficult conversations, specifically as we're talking about the elder population and things that we're dealing with. So I will turn it over to you.
Okay. Just a sort of a brief comment. Having these types of conversations is very challenging and difficult, and I don't want to get into a long conversation. other than to say if you haven't seen a film called The Farewell with Aquafina, that would be a good point to even start from popular media. And I'd like to mention the fact that in real life it is as hard, but also not quite as comical, and the solutions don't come quite that easily. That being said, one of the examples I give of how difficult it can be is at my site, my agency, I'm also the facilities person. So today, and ironically, in California, this is the Great Shakeout. We're supposed to be doing a drill for earthquakes at 10:30, and it's annoying to everybody because it interrupts their day. The problem is whenever I try to bring up the issue of earthquake preparedness or any kind of disaster preparedness, you're going to find people who have already done it, they're already ready for it, so that when it hits, they're prepared and they have things in place. And the challenging discussions are those individuals who have not done anything, don't want to go there. And when I say something like, well, in the event of a major catastrophe, you may not be able to go home to take care of your loved ones or your pets or your kids or your others, and so you need to consider what will be your plan for at least 2 to 3 day period. And the ones I'm worried about are the ones that said, oh, no, 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 I am jumping in the car, getting on the freeways, and I'm going home. And they're having a great deal of difficulty of considering something that it's not about if it'll happen, it's going to be when it's going to happen, whether it's disaster or our own mortality. And so what we'd like to do is to talk a lot about the culturally appropriate ways of dealing with the ambivalence, the fears, uncertainty. It sure is representative of the times they're going through. And to again understand that there are actually things that we sometimes see as obstacles because of our cultural upbringing and background, which are actually pretty useful strengths and things we can fall back on. And some things we don't even appreciate until years later. So that would be my intro to let's see if we can do this today.
So I think as Glenn and I were talking about, what are some of those cultural values that we have? And so, there are the expectations that we have. Being the number one son, you're supposed to be there's certain things that you're supposed to have. As a woman, you're supposed to always serve. These sometimes can be, they're real strengths to this. And I remember that as I was growing up and coming into my own in terms of what it was to be a good but a strong Asian woman, sometimes those things came into conflict. So it's the importance of being able to serve, being there, but then that's also seen as being subservient by those that understand the culture. There's some real strengths to being able to be there for others and not just for ourselves. And that's something which is very, very Asian. So it's the group versus the individual. But at some point, that can also be very, very challenging. It's at what point do we get so overwhelmed? And I know that we all feel like, I feel guilty, I feel really bad, I'm being a bad daughter, I'm not being a good number one son, I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing, but I just need to take a breath. Again, for those of you who are in the sort of the sandwich generation, it's how do you be able to take that space? Because every time we have this conversation, somebody goes, it's like being in the airplane. They always say, take the oxygen mask, put it on first, then help the others. Because if you burn out, you can't be there for others. But Glenn, I would let you know, as we were having sort of a dialogue, kind of what is it that sort of holds us back? And what are some of the, again, the strengths about, in Japanese it's called gamansuru, shigataganai. It's just, you suck it up and you suck it up. If maybe because I know that you've worked a lot with the communities and the things that you were seeing, so as we're talking about sort of sucking it up as from a male perspective, what is that like? And then what are some of the difficulties of having to do that?
Mm-hmm. Sometimes the hardest thing to do is just to differentiate when something that we call stoicism, the things that get you through the bad times, is being overplayed when it's not completely necessary. Gaman is the Japanese version, and I've heard different similar parallels in all the other different Southeast Asian, and South Asian cultures. The challenge is we oftentimes, as the caregivers, feel guilty that we have choices. We often hear the phrase that we have benefited from the experiences and all the work that are done by our elders from a leadership standpoint, that we stand on their shoulders. We sometimes forget to, and I just had this conversation with an intern when making a difficult decision as to whether or not they want to stay or go something that they're doing, and reminding them that those who came before you worked really hard to give you that choice, and that choice has been earned. You've earned the degree, you've earned the position, you've worked hard to come here. but sometimes not feeling like they had the permission to do so. Ditto when giving the permission to have the difficult conversations. Um, right now we're doing Zoom presentations, and sometimes you have to be a bit more animated in your conversations, and you have to emphasize, you have to overact a little bit. And I was trying to teach that to a number of our API staff who have to be in positions where they're talking to their subordinates and supervisees. And the comment was, "Oh, Glenn, you don't understand. You know, I'm Chinese. I don't do that. I'm Japanese. We don't do these things." And again, that's that difficult conversation. Because the reality is, if you've ever been to any family gatherings, you know how quiet that gets. So I have to kind of look and say, are you saying that I can't do this because it's a cultural norm issue that you're struggling with, or it's because you're just uncomfortable going there? And therein lies the need for giving some permission. Um, Staff don't like it when I talk about the fact that I have more years behind me than I have ahead of me, and I plan to make the best out of those years. That being said, they get real uncomfortable when I said, well, we need to talk about a succession plan. You know, one of these days I'm going to retire, one of these days I'm not going to be here, and people get really uncomfortable. But if we allow ourselves to present that and give permission to, it's going to happen, we should talk about how to prepare. I want you to be in a position that you are comfortable and don't have to worry about things. It's a kindness that people may not appreciate in the beginning. A personal example of that is a number of years ago when my father was passing. My mother at the time basically said, here's a piece of paper that she gave my brother and me, and I looked at it, and it was the cemetery plot. And I looked at it and I thought, oh my God, you know, why are we talking about this now? We're just burying Dad. My brother's reaction was priceless. He looked at it, and he hadn't quite bought his own first place yet, and he just said, oh crap, great, my first piece of real estate. It wasn't something that he accepted easily. It made him think about things he didn't want to, but years later he realized, wow, that was a real kindness and something that Mom really, really wanted us to have. And I think the permission giving is really important when things are ambivalent and uncertain. It is actually taking the leadership within one's own family to say, we need to do this, we need to go here, and it makes me feel better that we can go here. And the ironic thing is that is also very much an Asian cultural standpoint. The avoidance is when something goes awry. It's not easy, it's very challenging, it's difficult, but what I've noticed in my clinical experience and community experience is though may people react initially badly or feel uncomfortable with it, that constant position of saying, no, I'm good with this, I'm comfortable with this, and I want to be your son or daughter, I want to be your big brother, I want to be the person involved in taking care of you, even if they don't want to go into it right now. If you've planted those seeds early on, it can do wonders in terms of getting there. I feel bad for people who they only reach the conversation at the point of crisis. It's like you haven't put away any of your supplies for the earthquake or the hurricane, and now you're not going to have an easy time finding everything.
I think on that particular point there, that's very much what COVID-19 did, is it brought about, and if any of you have experienced this personally, we really, really do feel for you, and we're very sorry for any of the losses that you may have experienced due to COVID-19. Hopefully all of you are safe. But it brought about loss for over 216,000 people that did not plan on dying this year. It was one of those things that's really difficult. So I really want to emphasize what Glenn was saying. And again, as leaders, when you prepare for difficult conversations, and it could be a decision you're making with your own organization, within your agency, it might be how you deal with maybe a coworker or a supervisor or somebody that's not doing a good job, but you're not quite sure how to straighten up the situation. The more you anticipate and more you have clarity about what you want to do, it helps you get through. We are seeing a tremendous amount of anxiety in this country right now because there's so many, we're so divided, and there's one side saying this, one side saying that. Our job is not to tell you which side to believe in. What we're trying to get across is the importance of having clarity and being able to have those conversations. And when you're doing it, it's not being disrespectful, or it's not, my mom used to get really ticked off when I was a kid. I'd say, oh, something's going to happen. She'd go, DJ, don't say that. You know, it's going to botch you, or you're going to make it bad if something bad happened. she was sort of afraid to go there, to talk about these difficult situations. But when you're prepped for it, when you're in the crisis, and again, this is something we've known for a very long time. It's not just because of COVID-19, we've seen it over and over. When you're prepared for something in a crisis, that's the last time, or that's the worst time to make a difficult decision, end of life decisions. What are you going to do? An example would be, let's say that if an elder, Glenn and I both lost parents, maybe some of you have. Um, I was very fortunate that both my parents, even though they passed away, and I'd give anything to have them back, they had a fairly natural death, and they both died peacefully. We had family members who were on life support. And the decision there about if you pull the plug, and if you've got one sib that goes, how can you do that? How can you just pull the plug on dad? You can't do that. And the brother's saying, there's nothing we can do. We've tried everything. And it's a kindness to let Papa go. These are the kinds of decisions where we talk about end of life, because at some point, as Daphne said, we are all emerging agers. This is going to be where we're at. So my husband and I have living wills. We have a do not resuscitate. And we had this conversation with our parents because it was so important. We were very, very grateful. They also had the plot for us. So as you're preparing to get through them, again, COVID-19 just, it put the possibility of a death right in front of our faces. We can no longer ignore that. But our cultural values make it really, really hard sometimes to even talk about it. I remember when I was younger and my brother gave me a hug, and oh, my brother touched me. It was a totally appropriate touch, first of all. It was not anything creepy. But I was not used to physical contact. I was not used to expressing our emotions. And as we got older, we became much, much, much better about this. But the kinds of things that you may want to say, which we're not raised to do, maybe some of you were, so we're not saying that all Asians are alike. Everybody is the Masuda Shigataganai. Some of us are going to be more verbal by nature and even by culture. But oftentimes we have these conversations which are really, really hard. Think of the things that if you were in the other side, what do I wish I had said? What is it I would like to do? Those are the kinds of things, and you can always prep it because it'll be up to us that might be more comfortable addressing it than our elder parents to say, I know this is kind of hard, Mom, but I just want to let you know that I love you. Or I'm a little bit nervous for you. That brings us, that Glenn and I would like to talk about, is face saving. When we're dealing with an elder, we walk a fine line of protecting them because they may be in a position where maybe it's not safe to drive. Maybe they shouldn't be playing with a gas stove anymore. My aunt kind of got banned from her kitchen because one too many kitchen fires. How we protect them literally while preserving this sense of dignity is a huge issue. And again, you can look at this, think about situations in your office where somebody may not have done something well. You don't want to say, you really blew it, that was really stupid. Face saving is a really, really important Asian cultural that gets us past the impasse, gets us past those really difficult positions. So you get to the other side of having open communication. So instead of saying, Papa, you're just too old, you can't drive anymore. It's like, Dad, I was just coming by, maybe I'd like to sort of, can I kind of pick you up? You sort of ease into it. Or it's like, I just want to make sure you're safe, but you do it in a way that you allow them to do the things that they can still do. And I'm going to give you a very, very brief example, and then want to make sure that we hit some of the other issues. As Papa was getting older, we went for a little walk, and he was kind of unstable. We were afraid that he was going to fall, but I knew that if Papa felt my hands on his back, he'd go, DJ, I can do that. I don't need your help. I would have shamed him by saying, I think that you're no longer healthy. My sisters and I stood behind him, literally just 6 inches behind. If he fell, he was going to fall. He had no idea we were behind him. We let him have his dignity to be able to move ahead and to feel independent. We figured after all this, we owed it to Papa. These are some of the things that when we have these difficult conversations, how do we respect the cultural values? And it's not just for Asians, this would be for any elder. So be aware of their sensitivities without giving up our responsibilities to then, and as we said, do a role reversal, sort of protect who they are. So keep those in mind. Again, how is it, there are different ways of being able to show strength. So I think, we're going to very briefly go over some of the end of life issues. Glenn was talking about maybe getting, or getting ready for the cemetery. What are some other things, Glenn, that you've talked about in terms of end of life issues? What are some of the other things that would be important for us to discuss?
Uh, Again, from a joking standpoint, I think the interesting thing is sometimes the elder is actually willing to start having the conversation, but we get uncomfortable. I know when my aunt and my mom's older sister started saying things like, "Oh, when I die, you get the necklace. When I die, you get grandma's this and stuff. You know, when I die," and when we say, "Don't talk that way. Don't go there," and we've sort of lost an opportunity to talk about there is an end point and we need to do this. Um, End of life discussions can also necessarily need to discuss if, when and if it happens. Um, it was very hard to hear my mom tell me to my face, and again, I was very fortunate she did. At the time, I didn't appreciate it. She says, if I get to a place where I'm on life support, I do not want to be, and she described the vegetative state in her own way. And when she had a massive stroke, and the physician said, we can go in and do major surgery on her deep portions of her brain, I asked what would be the potential outcome. He says the highly likely she won't be able to walk, she won't be able to do this, she won't be able to do that. And my brother and I had already had the conversation and had the advance directive that said, no, we're going to wait and see if the swelling goes down. This is her wishes. We had had that conversation already. We didn't have the fight. Unfortunately, I had seen other relatives faced with similar situations because they had not had that difficult dialogue conversation get into horrific arguments, and there's a no-win there when whether they whether the loved one survives or passes on, you're going to continue that unfinished dialogue and conversation of you shoulda, woulda, coulda, instead of mom wanted this, dad wanted this. He was pretty adamant about this is what he wanted, and you've already had that conversation amongst yourselves. Um, Aftercare discussions as well. They, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm not sure if everybody knows what an advance directive is. You may, so excuse me, but could you explain to them what an advance directive is
hmm
and its DNR?
The Advanced Care Directive is basically most people when you go into hospitals and you're going in for major surgery, they'll ask you, do you have one? And never really fully explain that it's the instruction set should you become unable to make decisions for yourself. You identified individuals, maybe family, may not be family, who are authorized to make those decisions. Sometimes families are surprised that they thought since I'm the oldest son or the oldest daughter, I would be the one to have it. Grandma or mom or dad might have decided they wanted their best friend to be that instead. And again, having that directive done way ahead of time is a lot easier. Families that don't have the advance directive, depending on what state you live in, they're going to fall back on succession lines as to who has that choice. Usually it's a spouse. Usually, if there's not a spouse surviving, it'll go to the next of kin. And again, did you decide already who is going to make that decision? Have you had the conversation of what you know your parent or your loved one would want in the event they could not make decisions for themselves? All right.
Yeah, thanks. And I didn't mean to interrupt. So continue on what you were saying, but I just wanted to make sure they understood
Mm-hmm.
that part of it. So I apologize.
No problem.
But it right.
I think other conversations are around, well, what do you want to have? I mean, it sounded greedy for a relative to ask their mom, by the way, what do you want to have? What about your furniture? What about this stuff? Or you got a lot of dad's old stuff and he's not in a place anymore where he's going to want to use it. Can we help you clean up your house? And of course, that same cousin got accused of, oh, you're trying to grab stuff before I die. Get through the initial shock wave of getting that kind of statement thrown in front of you. Um, I think the conversations can be around anything, and like earthquake preparedness, you don't need to do everything at one time. It can be a little bit here, a little bit here. You put away the water now, a little food here, a little money here, flashlights here, and a radio here. And you do all those bits and pieces to put in place, and then ideally have your family members share in that process. It's an appreciation of the person while they are here instead of, oh God, now they're gone. And we never decided where to go, what we're supposed to wear. Do we have? Uh, my dad and my father-in-law had this crazy, crazy desire that long before they passed away, They told us to our faces, that's the coffin I want. Why are you getting the ugly green one? And I love the fact that my father-in-law said, it reminds me of my old car that I loved all my life because there's this odd green color to it. And then he started laughing. He says, and it's on sale. That's the one I want you to use. And I just looked at him like, uh, sure, whatever you like. And he was quite pleased. He was very pleased when the interesting irony is when he did finally pass and he was in the viewing stages, all his friends came by and said, hey, it just looks like his Lincoln. That's really nice. And I thought, oh my God, he talked about it with his friends as well. Um, that was actually, again, very comforting and humorously in his own way. He basically let his wishes be known, and we were very, very happy to accommodate. And one less thing he had to worry about.
You know, when you're talking about making some of those difficult decisions about care, it could be the coffin. There are times that I remember when my mom passed away first, and she'd been on dialysis, and it was very painful for her for 2.5 years, but it did prolong her life. When Dad was getting older and he was 90, and they said that his kidney was failing, and they said to him, well, Mr. Kato, would you like to be on dialysis? And he told us in advance, he says, I saw what Mom went through. I do not want to be on dialysis. And so these were the kinds of, his care was really, really important. So I remember going to the doc's office with him, and the docs, we asked him, if Dad doesn't get dialysis, what's the prognosis? And he says, well, we're never really sure, but dialysis could extend your life by maybe 6 months or something. So he said, come back in 6 months. So in 6 months, we went back, and what Dad heard was, if you don't do dialysis, because he said, I'd rather not be on dialysis than go through what Mom did. What Dad heard was, when we go, if I don't do dialysis, I'm going to die in 6 months. We go back in 6 months. The doc looks at him and goes, Mr. Kato, you're just fine. I'll just see when. And goes, wait a minute, I'm not going to die. And he goes, no, Dad lived for 2.5 years more, not on dialysis. There's no guarantee, but the whole thing is, again, when we have clarity about what our options are, just because one possibility is that it may shorten your life, but that was his choice. And we respected that. We all wanted Papa to live. As it was, we were very lucky. We got to keep Papa for 2.5 years without dialysis. He could have passed on in 6 months, but it was respecting what he wanted to do. And we're lucky that all 6 kids were pretty much of the same mind. We've seen so often when that doesn't happen. So one of the things I think it's very, very hard is to not sit in judgment of your sibs or others who are going, no, this, you can't do that. When you say, really, I understand, respect that they love your mom and dad just as much as you do. They just have a different way of dealing with it, because that's the bond that you want. We've seen too often when you're trying to make life decisions as a caregiver or with your children, or that, and we've seen this, and COVID-19 is really bringing this up, but we've had friends who had elder parents, and this is before COVID-19. Let's say that maybe they lived in Boston, but the parents were in LA or in San Diego or somewhere else. That distance, and then that feeling of, I'm the only one that's taking care of mom and dad, and you're over there and you've got your own life. These are the kinds of things, is to be able to just sit down and say, what is it that each of you can do to help mom and dad? We understand, because we're closer, that most of it's going to fall on me, but this is what I need for you to do. That's also a very hard thing for many Asians to do, is to ask for help. But when you have these conversations, it's because, again, it's not like, I'm doing all this, I need you, just, pick up your end. It's like, we all live mom and dad the same. I know you can't be there the same, but I really do need some help around this. What can we do together? So when you problem solve, you're not telling them what to do. You're making a collective decision. So, and if you're having the difficult conversations, instead of saying, well, mom, dad, what do you want to do? They go, I'm not going to die yet. Flip it around. Mom, dad, I hope you'll be around forever, but just in case something happens to me, I want to make sure that all these decisions have been made so that my husband doesn't have to do it, because you're my mom and dad, you're the in-laws. So maybe we can talk about this. So what you want to do, again, is preserve that sense of not dictating, but finding a way to have the conversations, pull it back around. And there are a lot of ways that you can have these conversations. The more we practice doing this, the better it is. And again, what Glenn and I were talking about, we talked to Daphne and Sarah and to Cindy about this also, is all of us are going to get older at some point. Well, Glenn and I are already there. So for the rest of you guys, as you're the emerging, we're now the elder. These conversations are relevant in any part of your life. We're focusing specifically on the sandwich generation, but think of other times in your life where you've had to have really difficult conversations. These strategies about finding another way around, it's not about you being right. It's about getting to the end point where everybody is in a place that you may not be in 100% agreement, but you understand the rationale for doing this. This is because this is in the best interest of mom and dad. This is what's going to help the family. This is what's going to help us get through the crisis when mom and dad pass away. So that's really, I think, the goal for doing this. And then maybe just sort of a few more minutes, and then we want to leave, I think, some time for any Q&A on there. I'm trying to think if there's anything else, Glenn, that you would like to sort of.
Yeah, I think I want to mention two things. One is the issue around stoicism.
Hmm.
I think that it's an incredible cultural value and strength that many of our families and cultures have and bring. It's a survival mechanism. It is the reason why sometimes we have a harsher conversation of, well, I want to choose to be a photographer or a dancer or an artist. And you may have parents who are first generation, second generation, who it was all about you work hard to put food on the table. That's a frivolity. You don't need to. That it has to be that. And it's a difficult conversation when someone stoicism can help you survive, but like any strength, if you overplay it, it can cause problems. You become so shielded. It's like, God, just yesterday, a kid saying, "Well, I want a suit of armor, so I don't get hurt by anything," and I had to kind of quietly examine and say, well, yeah, and that's also a way that you can never feel anything, and you never let anybody touch you. It may protect you from harm, but it robs you of the opportunity to get close to anybody. So you may have to make a choice. How can I help you be stronger without the armor? The other component is um, we're living in a time right now where everything is supposedly black and white, either or, good or evil. And that craziness of sticking to it's a binary conversation, you're either for us or against us, and having absolutely no way of understanding all the shades of gray, which for us as a people, it's actually shades of brown, but it's really difficult to, as a leadership skill set to have, is when things are uncertain, when things are ambiguous, when we're dealing with those shades of brown, can you be comfortable with that uncertainty and still work through it? I think when things are scary, things are challenging and frightening, people tend to want the binary discussion. It's a comforting thing to them, and that also is relevant to when we talk about end-of-life needs and issues. If you avoid it and you don't understand that that's a scary thing, it may not be happening to you right now, but can you be prepared for it? Um, that's something you can show and demonstrate as a leader within your own family. Many of us work in situations where you're the only API person in your entire company or area or department, and people look to you and say, well, do you know anything? And I hate it when that is done to us because we shouldn't be representing the whole freaking community. But the funny thing is then we go home, we downshift, we code shift into our API backgrounds, and suddenly this is the mainstream. And so what do we do in that environment? And it's there again. Take the value systems that we've had. Someone said, oh, I hate Asian culture because we're always focused on shame. And my point again is, see, the funny thing is that's a mainstream view of API culture, understanding shame dynamics. Saving face was something DJ said earlier on. Shame is actually an element of social accountability and responsibility. When it's properly understood, properly demonstrated, it's about you don't do things to hurt or harm or cause pain to others and people outside. It has never been meant, as is portrayed in the media, as a mechanism in Asian culture to enforce behaviors and a humiliation dynamic. That's when a cultural value gets overplayed, misused, corrupted, and unfortunately stereotyped. You know, our accountability. The reason why we're what is it now? I think D-Day, you mentioned this to me. Please do not mistake my silence for complicity. I'm trying very hard to show respect to you before I want to smack you. Don't push me to that point. And I think we all struggle with that. And it's these components that sometimes can get in the way or help when we have these difficult conversations. So,
I
sorry,
think
didn't mean
really,
to
no,
digest.
but that's fine. And the other part is don't take my silence for complicity. It's also don't take my softness as weakness.
Mm.
Because oftentimes I know very much for Asian women, but this is, I think, for Asian cultures as a whole, it is that sense of really doing things what's in the betterment of the group, which is very, very counter to the Western way of doing things, which is it's all about me. And there, in any situation, as Glenn said, it's not a binary, it's not an either or. Either extreme can be very, very difficult. Extreme individualism is very counterproductive, and society cannot function that way. Families cannot function if everybody's out for themselves. If we totally give ourselves up as human beings, there might be a point where it's just like, I can't take this anymore. Then we become defeated, and then we can't function. So it's being able to find that point, and this is where, as Asian Americans, with the emphasis on Asian American, it's about cultural identity. And so when I talk about, and I feel that, okay, this is what it is to be an Asian woman, I redefine what it is to be strong. So I may show strength differently than somebody that in my grandmother's generation back in Japan might have done. So looking at the behavior may be misunderstood, but given the context here, that is the way that I can retain a sense of cultural identity, but also be strong in ways that maybe I may be more verbal, I may be more outgoing. But if you look at what it is, you're also kicking it up, it's being respectful. So if I'm more verbal in this culture, which I may not be had I been raised in Japan or some in Asia somewhere, it's that being quiet in one place might be a sign of respect. Speaking up here might be a sign of respect because I'm listening to you and I'm engaging and I'm telling you what I'm thinking because that's an acceptable thing to do. So it really is not saying it's just behavior, it's understanding why do we do what we're doing. Sometimes it can be quiet because we're being passive aggressive. It's like, I ain't gonna say a word because I don't want you to know what I'm saying, or I'm just gonna climb up and you're gonna have to deal with it. Or it could be, I'm being quiet because I'm listening to you and I'm respecting. And it's not that my opinion doesn't count, it's just that I'm here to listen to what you have to say. So that's the understanding of the cultural part, that as leaders, when we understand the cultural dynamics and when it's done and it's understood in its proper perspective, it's a real tool. Because when we understand both the Western world and the Asian way of doing things, and there isn't just one Western way and just one Asian, but so there's generic dynamics, that as a leader makes you stronger. It allows us to move in and out of our families, but within the workspace or everywhere else, because it gives you new tools to be able to look at. It gives you a different perspective. It gives you a depth that really allows you to be able to go and problem solve in ways that others may not even thought about, because you know why you're doing it. You're not doing it to be weak. You're doing it out of respect and allowing that other person to then have their say, to not feel attacked. Because when people are attacked, they're going to attack back or close up. Conversation's over. It doesn't help with their family. It doesn't help in the work situation. So I think with that, we wanted to do is open up a Q&A, and we want to make sure that we leave a few minutes at the very end for Daphne to be able to sort of close it up. So I don't know if there are any Q&A, and Cindy, Sarah, how you wanted to handle the Q&A on this, because I was sort of watching the time here, and we're right at 21 after, so.
Well, thank you, DJ and Glenn. I learned a lot. I took a lot of notes, and there are a couple of questions. Some of the questions that came from our registration process, the first one gets to one of the things that we wanted to cover, which is how do I deal with emotional burnout? I suppose that's a question coming from someone who is a caregiver. You wanted to talk a little bit about wellness and self-care for the caregiver.
Right. First of all, we have to give ourselves permission that when you self-care, it is not being selfish. And that's where it's very quickly, we could have spent a little more time, but if you don't take care of yourself, you cannot be there for the others. And so when we understand that is just a reality, and if we push it and we push it and we push it, we're actually being very, very counterproductive. Self-care can be something very, very simple. It could be just taking a breath of fresh air. It's going for a walk. It's binge watching your favorite television program. It's doing things that just is for you, that gives you that joy. And you know that you're doing it because you have to do it, and you've actually earned that right. It is so hard. It's, again, when we're going back to what is the reality. The reality isn't you're not weak. The reality is, my God, you are overwhelmed. No human being can possibly all do that. So when you understand the realities that what you're doing is, it's the most normal reaction in the world is to feel burned out. And part of burnout is being ticked off, being angry, it's being frustrated, it's being, I don't want to do this. The more we don't take care of ourselves, the more likely those negative feelings are going to start coming up, and then we feel bad for having the negative thoughts. So it's like, I don't want to be pissed off, but that's what happens. I know that. I need to take it, because you come back with a different attitude. You come back refreshed. Glenn, I don't want to add on to that, but self-care is real important.
And if I can make a permission-giving statement, I was reminded at a conference that the term is currently has been used in Vogue for some time. It really came originally from the 60s. A woman by the name of Audre Lorde has said that self-care is an act of self-preservation.
Mm-hmm.
And it is something that sometimes we don't allow ourselves because we see it as sort of an extra fluffy thing that we really don't need. We should just hang it. And that's what I meant by when Stoicism goes too far forward. She wisely stated that as an activist, an African-American woman of color, she said that that's a political statement in itself to say, I'm taking care of myself because I need to survive. We talk about it from a clinical standpoint oftentimes as, well, if you can't take care of yourself, you're not going to take care of others. But I think sometimes, again, we need to give ourselves that permission.
Yeah.
Thank
Here's,
you. I'm sorry. Did you have something to add, DJ?
no, and I was just thinking, this is such an important topic, and I'm sorry, the other things, this is a topic that we could go on and on and on about. And so I think we will make ourselves available if anybody else wants to get a little bit more specific about kind of self-care things that they can do. But I think those are the key issues, is giving yourself permission, knowing that it's the wise thing to do. It's the kind thing to do.
Yep. And NAP also has a self-care and wellness program that advocates putting on your oxygen mask first, right? Taking care of
Yes.
those,
Yeah.
taking care of yourself, self-preservation.
Yep.
Another question that came up today, and it's from several folks, is when you have a spouse or partner for someone who's elder and you want to create an advance directive, how does the spouse or partner, or how does multiple children help make decisions together? Is there a rule? Is it state by state? Do you have any advice on that? Glenn's nodding his head.
Yeah, it's, I would defer the specifics to an attorney that you secure in your state of residence and wherever people are living, but in my own experience, when we went for the Advanced Care Directive as well as the Living Will, it was made very clear to us that you can designate one person as executor of the estate, one person executor of finances, but one person must be designated as the primary person in charge of the Advanced Care Directive. That being said, depends on the state. I'm in California, but generally speaking, yeah, the spouse is the first person in line if there is no information. So again, if you haven't had that conversation, consulted with an attorney or someone who specializes in it and is legally allowed to in your state, you're going to be left to the. It's like if you have a lot, even in terms of property for your parent, if there's not a clear designation by will or living trust that where something's supposed to go, you could lose a lot of that to the state that you're living in because they'll take care of it because there's no will. So
right.
I would defer the specifics to someone who is specializes in that. It could be an attorney or it could be a financial representative. Depends on your state.
Right. And I would sort of add to that you would designate a specific person, but that doesn't mean that others can't have a say in it. But there's real clarity so that the family would know that's the point person, that's the one that's going to be talking to, that will make the official medical decisions or legal decisions, whatever, that you do get it cleared up by somebody who is an expert in that area. But just because they're designated doesn't mean that others don't have a say. And you want to make that really, really clear. It's just like my brother's name is on there, but everybody had input into the decision. So
great, thanks. There was several questions that related to is there a culturally appropriate template? Is there a AARP checklist? And Daphne has very kindly put in the chat aarp.org/caregiving, where there's a number of documents and checklists that we can draw from. We'll make sure that these links are also available in a follow-up email to everybody who's on the call today. Another question that came up during the registration was, I'm concerned about one parent, my mom, taking care of my dad, and her reluctance to get help because she feels that she is the best person to do it and no one else would do it with such care. Do you have any advice for family where two elderly parents are really trying to make a go of it alone?
Yeah. The first thing you want to do is acknowledge the important role that the mother plays. And it's like, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right, Mom. Nobody could love Papa more than you. But as Dad's getting older, the care is getting harder. We all need help. And so what can we do? So you want to bring them into the decision making so you don't just sort of take over. But the first thing is you always acknowledge where they're coming from, and you really want to respect that. But you also want to make sure that Dad gets the best care. And then you can also say, and I want to make sure that you're taking care of yourself too, Mom. It's getting harder. So what can we do to help you so that you can be there for Papa? Because it's not just the dad, she's also getting older. So again, that's the way that you want to respectfully move into that, but also not deny the reality that they both may need some care. But too often we sort of step in and take over without respecting with the important role they're playing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally agree. It's a heartbreaking conversation to have, and again, so much easier if you've had it before. You know, to do it well, Mom is exhausted trying to take care of Dad, and she's also, and then suddenly I need to have that conversation with you, Mom. You're not looking so good yourself, and you're getting close too. Is not the best time to have it. If you've had that earlier conversation of when Dad starts to go and having trouble, how can I best help you? And and again, that's so much the template of giving the permission. Because when I've talked to so many of the spousal caregivers and the kids are complaining about how she won't let me help, and when we had that heart-to-heart conversation with the spouse, the funny thing is how consistently they said, I didn't want to burden them. They have their own lives. And so our role as a clinician was sort of be the go-between and say, by the way, did you know how angry your daughter is that you didn't let her help you? And mother's reaction was, no, but I didn't want. No, no, she's really ticked off, and maybe even having to have her sister be the one to tell her that instead of the daughter telling her face, directly. There are so many culturally appropriate conduits in which you can have those conversations. You may need to get allies in the family to say, yeah, 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 yeah. Your daughter really wants to help out, but she's kind of upset you didn't let her. Is such a nice culturally syntonic way of saying, no, we really do want to be there. To say it, it's like my mom didn't tell me she was proud of my academic professional accomplishments till I was in my 40s. Um, but I didn't get mad when she finally told me because all along the way, her siblings kept telling me how proud she was. And again, very Asian culturally syntonic way of having that happen. But if I'm just sitting there mad at her because why didn't you tell me yourself? I said, well, that's demanding my mom be very American in the way she engaged me, and that was very hard for her. So there's a lot of ways we can facilitate that conversation.
Wow, that's great. Thank you, Glenn. You guys make it seem so easy. You have this.
No.
Yeah, and especially, I mean, we've both done clinical work for a long time and have had to do with their own parents. My heart always, those are the conversations that never become easy, they become easier.
Mm-hmm.
And I think about when Mom and Dad passed. To this day, I miss them. It's been years. I think, I wish I had said this to Mama. I wish I had done that with Papa. But I think the more we can talk about this, then you can also go, but I am glad I did this with Papa. I am really glad I did this with Mama. So there's so many more stories. And I wish we had time to just listen to the stories from all of you about where you are, things that you have learned, experiences. This is, we really thank you for the opportunity to be able to just share some of the things that we've done and some of the work that we do. And it's just too bad we always have such a short little time to do this. So this is,
yeah, I think Yeah,
Heal.
I think an important thing to remember is this. I find it ironic that we talk about how interdependent and socially oriented we are when it comes to our cultural backgrounds and strengths, and how ironic it is that when it comes to these types of caregiving issues, so many of the folks we've worked with talk about how isolated and alone they feel, that no one has really come in and said, "Hi, I'm here to do this and take care of this and help you out." And no, I'm supposed to. I'm your neighbor, I'm your relative, I'm your friend. And so I find it ironic that people tend to isolate whenever I hear any group of people say, "Oh, well, let us alone. We tend to take care of this stuff ourselves." It may be an element of privacy, but it oftentimes um, it's sort of a sense of, well, no one else is going to help us, nobody else can help us, nobody else is willing to help us, so we're going to do it. And again, that's stoicism kicking in to survive, but it's sort of like, no, you're not alone. It's such an important message to put out there. Oh God, it's 30 years ago we had a major problem. It still happens periodically where you hear of a mother taking the lives of her children and then killing herself, the mother-child suicide phenomenon we saw so frequently 35 years ago. And when you said you make it so easy, it's like we've kind of been through those battles and tragedies where when we did a deep dig on those situations, it was again, this was an unfortunate, tragic situation where a mom felt like, I don't want my kids going into foster care and being adopted. They'll be second-class citizens. It's kinder that I take them with me. And how alone that woman must have felt, and not feeling like there was anyone that was willing to, and ashamed she was for whatever reason. And the sad thing was the community itself, when they heard of mom saying, well, I took them because it was a kinder thing to do it. How many people in the community said, oh, I get that. Sure. Yeah, if it were me, yeah, I can see that. And how crazy making that is for us as mental health professionals when there are so many resources available, but there is such a cultural hesitancy to ask for the help. And I'd say is, well, what we should have been doing is we should have been offering it in the first place.
Sort of, and I also want to be sort of mindful of the time. It's one last minute thing. There's one of the things that is very hard for children to do, adult children, is to give our parents permission to pass. And to just say, Mom, Dad, if I could keep you forever, I would. You've given so much. And this is also not the time that, I mean, I was like, both my parents are extremely just wonderful, kind of gentle. So I didn't have any, and you did this and you did this. But if for any of you may have some anger, bitterness, that is not the time to do it. It's a time to be able to say, for both of you to bring closure, to say, it's time for you to go. And I want you to be at peace. Because those will be the last things you'll say. Those are the last things they're going to hear. And you want to make sure that that is what stays with you. If there's anger, frustration, or things inside of you, you can deal with that later. But you don't want to say, I can't believe I was so pissed off at Mom. The last thing I said was, and you know what you did to me? Can't go. I really would hide this if you don't go there. But I remember we told Papa and Mom, miss you, but it's time for you to go. And so again, we really want to respect your time, but I want to make sure we turn it back over to Daphne and to Cindy for you to bring it down. And again, thank you very much for giving us this opportunity to have this conversation with all of you and to be able to share. And you know, it was a real treat for us too. So thank you, appreciate it.
Well, thank you, DJ and Glenn. I have taken notes and notes and notes. Stoicism. I really wanted to learn more, Glenn, about how we might be able to use that concept in the work that we do. So I'd love to be able to follow up with you on that. Thank you so much for all those great questions. And I did post a number of resources on the chat site, and it looks like Cindy will actually be able to help circulate that as well. So please feel free to reach out to me, and I put my email in there as well. But thank you more importantly for taking the time to really want to learn about, hear about, and start to have these difficult conversations with you and your loved ones. And so we're extremely grateful. So Cindy, thank you for your leadership, and look forward to what's next with AARP and NAP.
Great. Thanks, Daphne. Everyone for being here today. If you do have questions for us, you can follow up with us, as we will be following up with you in an email. For those of you who are not shy and want to turn on your video, and I will just unmute everyone if you want to chat for a moment before we leave, before our speakers have to go. we will do so. Otherwise, I bid you a good day. We're going to turn off the recording, so our conversation will be more social, informal, and confidential.